Okay, let's move on to our speaker for this evening. I'm really pleased that we have to talk to us this evening Lydia Frommer, who's an architect and town planner and also a Lyons resident. Lydia has 30 years experience in her professional field in Canberra, and here at the council, Woden Valley Community Council, we first became aware of Lydia's work when she put forward an extremely well-argued submission in relation to the Woden 9 development, which some of you may remember. We pointed out was an extremely badly designed attempt to add to high-rise in and around the town centre. So I thought it would be a great thing if we could get Lydia along to our meeting tonight to talk about high-rise, the pros and cons, from a professional architect's and town planners, but also, of course, a Woden Valley resident's point of view. So I'll hand over to Lydia Frommer. Thank you, Lydia.
We're going to talk tonight about high density and especially about the negative space. That is the space between the buildings, which is the most important space in designing a high density development. But first of all, let's look at different options of achieving high density. When they actually started building high rises, it wasn't to achieve high density, but rather to show technological developments, because there was the lift introduced at that time, and it was possible to build higher because of steel construction and other technological advancements. So it's only in more recent times, not so recent, but that actually the development of the high rises went into the high density to achieve higher density by the high rises. But higher density can be achieved in by different methods. And here we have a diagram which shows the same density being achieved in these different configurations, which can be the high rise, and then we see that around the high rise there is a large area, open area, and that actually is the negative space. When I'm going to talk about the negative space, I mean the space between the buildings. So we're looking at the building being the positive space. So the building itself has got floors and elevations, and that's the positive space. But what happens between the buildings is the most important part of a high density planning, and that is not only at the ground level, but if the buildings are high, also the space between the buildings at the higher levels. So here we see in the first this simple here. We see here that we have two buildings, and that's the relationship between them, which is a questionable relationship if the distance between the buildings is not adequate. And then we see these other configurations and so forth. We look at the Parisian method, where actually highest densities were achieved by 6-story mid-rise buildings rather than the high rises that we are so familiar with. Under this system, there is a 230 dwellings per hectare density, which was achieved in Paris, while Sky Plaza is only 208 dwellings per hectare. So really, there is no need for a high rise for high density. And the Parisian method goes on to having buildings built on the perimeter of the site with courtyards, inner courtyards. So that's a different method of getting higher density. This is just a high-rise method, large extruded building, what I call, because all the floors are similar. This is a thing that usually developers and planners might go for because it's the simplest method. It's very easy to plan, it's very easy to build, and it's cheap and nasty. The space between the buildings is the most important space, as I said, and that is the space that provides the outdoor areas, the public areas, the communal areas. The streets themselves are a negative space because they are the actual space between buildings. Also provides courtyards, landscape surrounds. The functions of the negative space, the space between buildings, is to provide privacy, the acoustic separation, visual separation, access to light and sun, which is very important, and the feeling of spaciousness. They are actually, the negative space will give that feeling of what the development is about, whether it's livable or not. So it's more important than the actual design of the building itself. To get the negative space into a relationship that is suitable for building, we're going to look at the width of the street in relation to the height of the building around the world. And Canberra has got no restriction at the moment, mainly because the territory plan was not designed for high density, and it still doesn't have the quantitative measures that it needs for high density. Canberra has no restriction. Berlin is 7 stories. Usually London is 8 stories. Washington has got a higher one of 13 stories, but mainly they relate to the width of the street. There is nothing in the territory plan to look at that, the relationship between the width of the street and the height of the building. And that is, I looked at the width of street in Warden, Melrose, Launceston and Further Street, and according to that principle of width of street to height of building, you could look probably at 14 stories maximum on Melrose Drive, and less stories on Launceston and Further Street. So that is something that has to be taken into consideration. Just to show the feeling of a street where the buildings are very tall, that's Toronto and as against Paris, and yet Paris has got much higher density than Toronto. So this is what can be achieved by looking at the relationship of the actual negative space. This is showing Paris at 7 stories high. The whole city has got this restriction on height, 7 stories, and yet it's one of the densest cities in the world. It's higher than Mumbai, which has achieved a smaller density by high rises. This is there are here some examples from around the world to show how these buildings, high rises, might have achieved good resolution in that they give a lot of open space around it. This is a place in Paris where actually, although the building is extruded, it creates that open space that is quite inviting. There are other buildings around the world, like this one in Singapore, which has got also a partly extruded sort of structure, but it's got lower buildings towards the view. So there is that negative space again, the relationship of the building to its surrounds, what happens around this development. This is one of the highest rises, 38 stories in China, where actually the building is stepping down and it's trying to create that lacy effect so that it's not just towers and they all get sun and private open spaces that are open to the sky. This development was first inaugurated in 1967, which is a long time ago. It's the Habitat in Montreal, which achieved very high density by modular placements. So it actually not only achieves a ground floor space, which is inviting, but the space between between the actual units is inviting. That's the negative space that is so important. This is another example of stacked buildings in Singapore. How to achieve good orientation and also not too much interface, close interface between buildings, and a view to the water, which is on this other side. I brought this especially because, for lack of other better photo, because this is a principle of building over water or over anything, over roads. And if you can imagine, this is a Ponte Vecchio in Florence, so it's not really relevant except for the principle of it, that we can actually build high-rises or high density or whatever, bridging over roads, over water, over anything. So that might be something that has to be looked at. This is a development of a very high density residential, where actually there is a type of artificial hill that was formed so that all the units can get a lot of sun, and they're creating quite a nice environment. This is a conceptual plan that was never built, where you can actually achieve a very high density of a community by stepping down the building towards the street, so it doesn't actually interfere with the light in the street, with the feeling of the street. This is Parkrand in Amsterdam, where because of the placement of the buildings and the relationship between them and the holes that were created, the whole building has got a good outlook and it's got a lot of privacy in spite of its high density. We'll talk about high-rises implications that unfortunately there is an increased cost of construction with high-rises because of additional stairs, elevators, parking podiums, circulation areas, swimming pools, and so forth. There is also an increased energy consumption in buildings over 9 stories high. In 2005, Energy Australia, in cooperation with New South Wales Department of Planning, did a research on that, and that's what it was found, that actually any building over 9 stories high is really not energy efficient, it loses. There are also issues of high body corporate fees and affordability, because some of these units in these high blocks, because of the construction costs, obviously are going to be more expensive than in medium density or low rise. The question arises whether high rises are suitable for Canberra. And the worst issue is really the issue of construction costs. The Owners Corporation of Canberra have tried for many years to address this and work together with ACTPLA for some sort of resolution. Nothing has happened, and the faults in these high-rise buildings are widespread until such time that this can be addressed and resolved. I think that high-rises in Canberra are a problem, because a high-rise is a very complex building, and the builders are not in Canberra are not so experienced in these issues. They usually build 1, 2, 3 stories buildings, and the same technology cannot be applied to a 20-story building. So there is really a big gap there that has to be addressed. There is also any building that's over 3-story high does not have the mandated owner's warranty insurance that applies to 1, 2, or 3 stories high. So the owner is actually not protected in case of faults and unscrupulous builders. So this is a major issue. In 2005, the insurance existed before 2003. 2003, it was decided to just get rid of it because not a lot of builders could afford it. But as a result of that, nowadays it's a lot of builders who are not suitable for developments like that, that actually would build a high-rise. Buildings in Canberra have not been designed to withstand earthquakes. There are only 3 buildings in the whole of Canberra designed to withstand earthquakes. So of course, when we have high-rise buildings, this is a huge problem. The densities for the high-rise are not driven by planning really, but the need to increase revenue. And that is because the ACT government has got very few sources of income, and land is one of the things, the major revenue income. The last issue is that the high-rises are not suitable for the aging, in spite of the fact that they might be presented like that, because in case of fire, when you cannot use a lift, it's a big issue. This is the Warden Town Centre plan. It's a schematic thing that ACLA put out, but I did mark with red all the areas that will have actually high rises. All the areas here that are marked in red will have high rises. This is the Warden Town plan. Anything that they have in the pipeline to actually release land, this is what's going to happen. They're all high rises here. I marked here in blue this area, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the thing about this high-rises plan for the Warden Town Centre is that there is really a fantastic opportunity to develop something great. But for that, it's not suitable to release one block at a time. That conceptual system of development has to be in place to actually achieve something that's really good. And there aren't many places where you can get something like that, where the government owns all this land and therefore it can be developed together, except that to get the highest amount of return, there is this ad hoc development where each block is released one at a time. And with each block released one at a time, the negative space we were talking before cannot be achieved because it's not looking at the relationship between buildings. That in the previous slide, this area that I said it's bluish here. This is the area that is shown here as high rises everywhere, but no negative space between them. This is taken out of the Warden Section 9 presentation or submission to ACLA that was probably inadvertently put on the site as a waste management plan, covered up. So these are the high rises here that really, they show that there is absolutely no thought about any relationship between one or the other. Looking at relative densities, the Sky Plaza is 208 dwellings per hectare. Some of Paris is 230, as I said. Habitat building, the 1967 one that I showed before, has got 160 dwellings per hectare. The highest density in China, the Singapore development, the 38-story one has got 417. And here is one proposed Section 9. So obviously, if the negative space, the space between the buildings would have been considered, we might have got somewhere else. The roads and traffic in Borden are a problem in that every traffic report that was issued relates to each high-density building on its own in relation to the existing situation, and yet there are a lot of high-rises that have been approved or are in the pipeline, so there is no consideration for a comprehensive problem. And also the impact of the traffic on the adjacent suburbs is not at all looked at. In terms of Lyons development, I'd like to see more suitable accommodation for the aging. In dual, triple occupancy townhouses, generally one-story buildings. And in adaptable buildings that are suitable for the disabled and the aged, because there is a standard the Australian standard for the adaptable dwellings, and that requires that an adaptable dwelling be easily adaptable to a disabled or aged person, meaning that all the facilities that are essential are located on the ground floor. The territory plan shows that they will give a concession for adaptable dwellings so that you can fit more on sites or in the established areas, as you can see here. Usually one more unit than normal units that you'd be able to put on site. But this has been used until now to increase densities rather than provide adaptable dwellings, because the interpretation of ACLA is that you can have a two-story dwelling that is adaptable with only the living room and the toilet on the ground floor, and the rest, kitchen, bathroom, whatever, bedroom, on the second floor. So, yes, that's things that need to be addressed. I think I'll get somebody else to talk now.
What a presentation.
Thank you so much. Fabulous presentation, really mind-stretching, and I think you've given us a rationale and a way of thinking about issues which I guess we were intuitively aware of, but weren't really able to put the case as well as you have done. So I'm sure there are some questions and comments, so please feel free. Chris?
It was an excellent presentation, Lydia. I guess the question is, as you'd be aware, we often have presentations here from developers with their designs already finalised. They're usually just about to go to the DA, and we've had presentations from ACLA. How do we communicate this to the developers and the authorities who regulate? Obviously, we've got the master plan process coming up, which we'll talk about later, but can you go and do some presentations to ACLA?
I do. Not as presentations, as letters, not only to ACLA, to the minister, but you know, it's not enough one person, so each one of you, if you've got something to say, please put it in writing, because it's not going to help if you just think about it. Also, in this new town planning exercise for Borden Town Plan and Mawson, try not to follow the questionnaire, because that is just directing you to what they want to hear. So write about what you think should happen, ignoring the questions, unless you find them of importance, and then you'll address that. But don't take it as something that you have to go through. It's just a waste of time.
I guess we have been putting things in writing, but the problem is getting the attention of the relevant decision makers. They do tend to put us down. Probably less so in your case, I'm not sure, but
I wouldn't take it, I wouldn't take it seriously. I mean, I can put down a few things, so why worry? I mean, what's this putting down? Just because that's what we need to do. The thing is that there's now quite a bit of movement against these high-rises and the problems that they are creating, and the Victorian government is now looking at why their high-rises are not livable. And they are looking exactly at this negative space. They might not call it like that, but it's the space between the buildings, the heights, the relative spaces that are created and all that sort of thing. So that maybe Canberra could look at that as well.
more questions or comments? Oh, sorry, no.
Sorry.
You might have seen in the news that had the tall building .com in there is going to start early because they sold about 2/3 or whatever off the plan. So there's obviously a market there for it, but not that sort of really to.
The market for this sort of developments is mainly investors, and now the market has existed until now. There is a very soft market in the rental of these units, and they don't get rented very easily. The mix of units that are provided in these high-rises is a big problem because they are also, a lot of them are 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom. It's really not attracting a proper mix of population. The demographics are wrong. And what will happen, I presume, is that a lot of these buildings are going to stay empty. And when that happens, there's going to be a deterioration of building of the whole thing. Except that meanwhile the government is still intent on doing this because that's the source of income, whatever, investors or whoever might be there that are paying the rate, the land tax, whatever.
Is it presenting it such that if you can do this under living space? I'm just thinking of my son lives in Sydney. Now he's in a block of flats with 6 stories around 3 sides with an 18-story tower. But in the middle, you've got a park, you've got a tennis court, you've got a swimming pool, you've got that atmosphere so that he's increased in value 100,000 in the last 2 years, and it's easy to rent. And they're paying, they get better rates from it because the value's there and it's in demand because it's, it's a nice place to go to.
Is that one
Yeah.
park in Sydney?
It's in Erskineville, Sydney.
Oh, okay.
I'm just saying that I've seen nothing like that here.
Yeah.
But the government will get more because they're fully occupied and you can get good rates from it.
Yes, but they're looking at a very short span. So that's the problem.
A short span, sorry?
A short span. I mean, they're looking what's going to happen now, today, tomorrow. They're not
Oh, I see.
interested in what's happening later on.
Yes, one question here and then
Just to support your point on building defects, it's not just Canberra. A University of New South Wales study of units or strata title in Sydney, I think it was, or maybe New South Wales, 85% of respondents to that survey reported building defects. That's in units built since 2000. Apparently that was the time around the Olympics when they really deregulated the building industry. It was a free-for-all, let them do whatever. 85%, some of those very serious structural defects. So
Yes.
It's not just Canberra, it's the
No, it is.
Australia, the deregulation of the building.
Yes, especially since 2003, when the home warranty insurance of buildings over 3 stories was scrapped, so that, well, anybody can come in and do a high-rise now.
Mike.
Lydia, this is a question that I've asked of the ACPA people on numerous occasions. I get popped off every time, so I'll be interested in your view. To me, one of the big problems with very high-rise residential is if you're creating a residential facility that's twice as high as the biggest fire engine that we've got can reach. What is there to prevent some form of arson, some sort of real disaster happening in a building where the residents driving at the bottom can bring anything up to the top? If you're on the 20th floor, you've got a person with a mental health difficulty, takes up several hundred litres of petrol over a particular time and decides to set fire to it. How do you put it out? You know, at least with a 3-storey building, there's a chance that the Bronte can come along and put it out. But it just seems to me this is something that's fobbed off. Oh well, they've got sprinklers in there. We'll get over it somehow. There is an Australian standard. There just doesn't seem to be any disaster management as far as that's concerned.
Yes, did you see the movie Tower and Inferno?
Says it all, doesn't it?
That's what's going to happen.
Lydia,
Well, just one question, Lydia. Is it possible that we can have a copy of this presentation? Because I think you've raised some pertinent issues that we individually can argue with our ESD about this sort of ongoing problems. So can we get access to that?
Yes, it's on the Warden Valley computer now, so.
okay.
We'll put it up on the website.
So you'd be happy for us to
Yeah.
put it on the website?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll put it up.
Go.
Thank you.
Yes.
Lydia, I compliment on what you said and follow up, and I could not disagree with it, except for one word. You talk about something that's not living. When we moved to the present place, that was about our 30th time. There were 4 different states in Australia, 4 different counties in the UK, a couple of different states in the United States. We had some magnificent, absolutely magnificent. We moved into the Sky Plaza 8 years ago, and it is by far the most livable, and every day it seems to get even more so. Now, I'm not disputing anything you said, just a term. But unless you define that term livable, I'm sure there's another term that can be used. But, we are completely happy to just say, old people, well, not actually spring chickens, we're on the 13th floor, and if we start getting too wobbly and a bit worried, we'll go down to the ground floor. There are different solutions in the building complex. So, did you think of another word for it?
No, I can understand why you see your building as livable, and indeed it is, and that is because it's the only tower in that surrounding area. If you got another 1, 2, 3 towers near you, you might find that you might like to move out of there.
I agree with you there. We did.
So that's the livable that I mean, that negative space that's going to be created between these buildings. At the moment, your negative space is very nice. So it's livable, more than that.
Just to pick up on Bill's point, that's an important thing that we often feed back to new development proposals, is that people often refer to Sky Plaza and the way it looks and all the rest of it, but all the units in there have a north-facing orientation, a northerly aspect, so they get the solar access, which is an important contribution to the livability of it. But the problem is that I think nearly every other development that we've had since then has an east-west orientation, so they either get the morning sun and nothing for the rest of the day, or west, for the minimum 3 hours, or they get the hot summer sun on the westerly aspect. And we often say, for all the drawbacks from Sky Plaza, that is its one big advantage, is the northerly aspect.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
And the Section 9 proposals were 90% or more of the units were facing east-west.
Yeah.
The way to achieve energy ratings on this sort of principle is to actually have double glazing, which means you can't open your windows to maintain the energy efficiency. And it is really a very bad system. That's where the energy rating is a laughable matter, because it shouldn't work like that. So even the software systems are not really that great. So that's something to consider.
Lydia, I wonder if I could ask you to go back to the slide that showed the figures for the relationship between building height and road width.
That's
You had
the
some
beginning.
thoughts there about
Yeah.
heights for Woden Town Centre.
Yeah.
So, would you say for our purposes, when we're making submissions on these matters, that argument, which sounds entirely sensible to me, is one that we should adopt? Because
Well, I think it should have something like that, meaning that actually that section 9 is facing Melrose Drive and Further Street. So you have there a 6 and a 14 story. So that is the building somehow has to step down for Further Street or do something else. Really not an extruded building, one of those simple ones, but something has to happen that somebody gets some more interest in the building to achieve what needs to be achieved in a three-dimensional way rather than an extruded.
yes,
Yeah, quite a few of the architects that come along suggest having a podium of 3 or 4 levels and then tall centre tower in the middle, which I would guess makes the streetscape a lot better. You know, the podium would have a couple of floors, a car park, I don't know, shops and things, restaurants. Is that at all plausible?
It is plausible, but it's a very sort of simple method. Again, it works on extrusion, and it's questionable how big this tower is in relation to another tower that might be placed on an adjacent land, and how much space there is between the towers. At the moment, unfortunately, the territory plan only goes to the high density for residential to RZ5. That's it relates to RZ5, and the height of building there, the maximum height in the territory plan is 21.5 meters, which is about 7 stories. Up to that height, there are quantitative measures for these buildings in relation to how they relate to each other. After that height, there is nothing. And that is because when they wrote the territory plan, they never thought about heights bigger than that. And that's where it's left now.
Lydia, the temptation to pick your brains just is irresistible. We have been told that precinct plans for the Woden Town Centre area offer some possibility for perhaps bringing together some of these things. Can you comment on that?
The precinct plans, unfortunately, they could bring something like that, however they don't. The precinct plans are used by the government to circumvent the territory plan. And this is a widely used mechanism for this, where actually densities are increased, things are just, well, if you look at it, that the Burnie Street development was supposed to be under the RZ5, which is an 8-story high, and it went higher than that. That's one way of circumventing the territory plan. Not only that, there is a bill now that's the new territory plan bill, which gives the minister not only powers that he had before to call in plans, but the power to be called the decisive authority, either him or ACPA. Previously, only ACPA was deciding on plans. Now the minister is going to do that as well, and he can also speed up developments of great importance that he thinks are important, which could be anywhere. They will have to be presented to the Assembly for that. And the Greens have agreed that they are going to support the bill because the politicians are interested in getting the planning into the political arena. And the planning should stay with the planners, with the professionals. But now it's going to be a ding-dong between politicians and anything else.
Prospect.
Just to wrap it up, I guess, is what are your thoughts? Should go ahead at vote 9? In my personal opinion, should be a design competition around human scale development.
Well, it could be a design competition, or the other option, which is really something that, yeah, design competition is probably good, but there has to be some sort of thought about the quantitative measures for buildings of higher than, say, 8 stories to apply for any development. And if that is not in the territory plan, that really I think that all the competitions in the world won't solve that, because nobody knows what's good for Canberra. So really it is back with the planners to do that work, to bring up the territory plan to that. At the moment, anything in the commercial area has got hardly any quantitative measures. It's just a waffle, and it's not looking at things in detail. So until that is looked at, I think that any plan that's going to be put forward is fraught with danger, because it can be knocked back, approved, or whatever. So I think that that's more important than getting the competition going. Really, the house has got to be in order. And also all the other things have to be in order. The faults, and especially the homeowner warranty insurance has to be resolved before we're building any more of these great buildings that are going to fall or catch fire or be subject to earthquakes.
Okay, well, I guess we should.
I'll just make a comment, if you don't mind, that with section 9 in particular, the applicant for the proposal was the Land Development Authority, which had a vested interest in being able to maximise the number of units there, because to then go to put it out for auction to developers, they're obviously going to make more if they've got already approval. It's adjusted, rather than having to then go and get the approval after they've got the land. So obviously the land is worth more. Do you think that the Land Development Authority should not be seeking development approval for any particular site to be sold?
Well, this is Land Development Authority is in conflict of interest in that it is a government authority that looks to maximize income from land speculation, and that is something that is really not going to be any good for the ACT if it continues, and it's really not suitable for the owner of the land, the government, and one body actually deals with everything, including the approvals on this development. A land agency submits the development. ACLA is compromised because they are under continuous pressure from the government to approve these developments, which are for the government, because the LDA is part of the government. So they have to approve whatever. So that they're compromised, really. It's just a terrible place to be at in ACLA at the moment with these political pressures.
Well, I guess we should lined up there. Lydia, it's been a really mind-stretching presentation. You've given us lots of terrific ideas. Thank you so much. Please join me.